Ranger stopped moving in the middle of the cemetery, not slowed, not hesitated. Stopped, the way he stopped when something required his full attention, all four paws planted, head dropped level, amber eyes fixed on a headstone 3 rows in from the gravel path. Jackson Hayes had been walking with him through the November morning for the better part of 20 minutes, letting the dog pick the direction the way he sometimes did on quiet days, and he'd learned by now not to override the dog when he got like this. He stepped off the path and followed. The grave was modest. Gray granite, older, with the edges gone slightly soft from weather. There were no flowers on it. The small American flag that had been placed in the holder beside the stone was bleached nearly white, the kind of fading that happens over many months without anyone noticing or replacing it. Jackson read the name. He read it again. His hand found the back of Ranger's neck without thinking. He stood there for a long time. Before we go further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. What you're about to hear will stay with you. Gunnery Sergeant Jackson Hayes, USMC, retired, was 39 years old and had the look of a man who had been assembled for purpose rather than appearance. 6 feet, even, with a frame that had been shaped by 2 decades of physical demand into something lean and permanent, the kind of build that neither gains nor loses easily because the body has decided what it is. His hair was dark and cut short out of discipline that had outlasted the military's requirement for it. His jaw was square and clean-shaved. His nose had a slight leftward deflection from a break sustained during hand-to-hand training in Helmand Province in 2013 that the field medic had set well enough to function and imperfectly enough to show. His eyes were a pale, clear hazel, the kind of light-colored eyes that read differently in different conditions: gray indoors, green in open air, and in direct November sunlight, the particular color of shallow water over sand. And they moved with the careful, continuous attention of a man who had spent long enough in places where the wrong thing missed could mean someone didn't come home. He was not a man who missed things. He had not missed things for a very long time. He had deployed 4 times: Ramadi in 2007, Helmand in 2010, and again in 2013. And a final rotation to Kunduz Province in 2016 that had ended when an eye detonated 30 meters ahead of his vehicle during a route clearance operation, and the overpressure from the blast left him with a fractured orbital socket, a perforated eardrum that had since partially healed, and a traumatic brain injury that the discharge paperwork classified as moderate and that Jackson, in his private accounting, classified as the reason he sometimes lost words mid-sentence and woke up at 0430 with a clarity that had nowhere to go. He had been medically separated in 2017 and had spent the 3 years since in Harlan County, Kentucky, in a house outside the town of Evarts that had belonged to his grandmother, and that he had come back to because it was the only place he had ever lived that didn't require him to explain himself. He was not unhappy in Evarts. He was still learning, on a timeline he couldn't predict, how to be a person whose job was living rather than a specific and demanding form of service. Ranger was helping with that. Ranger helped with most things. Ranger was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, 84 pounds, with a coat that ran from a deep, almost mahogany black along the saddle and mask to warm amber tan at the chest. Legs and flanks, the classic coloring rendered in richer tones than most, as though the color had been turned up slightly from the standard setting. His right rear leg carried a slight stiffness from a nerve injury sustained during a building search in Kunduz in 2016, the same operation that had ended Jackson's deployment. And he walked with it the way a man walks with an old scar, not limping, simply accommodating, the body having made its permanent adjustments and moved forward. His left ear had a notch along the outer edge from a piece of wire that had caught him during a tunnel search in Helmand, healed clean, almost decorative in its precision. He moved with the economy of a dog who had been trained to cover ground efficiently and had never unlearned it, not patrolling exactly, but never not aware. His nose working continuously and his attention cycling through the environment with the steady discipline of an instrument that doesn't turn off. He was the individual Jackson trusted most in any room or field or open space. The trust ran in both directions, and they both knew it, and neither of them found this complicated. The Harlan County Veterans Cemetery sat at the edge of a ridge outside Evarts, on land that had been donated in 1951 by a Cole family whose 2 sons had not come back from Korea. It was a small cemetery, as military cemeteries go. 412 graves at the last count Jackson had seen on the sign near the gate, but it was kept with the kind of care that spoke of people who took the keeping seriously. The grass was cut. The flags were replaced. The gravel paths between the rows were raked clean of leaves after the fall winds came through. In the November morning, with the ridgeline behind it gone to bare branch gray and the sky the particular flat white of Kentucky in late autumn, the place had the quality of something set apart, not sad but serious. The way places become serious when they hold a great deal of what mattered. Jackson walked Ranger here on the mornings when the silence in the house felt like a weight rather than a rest. He didn't pray there, exactly, he thought. He let the names on the stones be a kind of company that required nothing from him, which was the kind of company he had found he could accept without difficulty. He had never had a reason to stop at any particular grave before. He read the name on the stone a 3rd time. Corporal Dale Winston Merritt, United States Marine Corps. Born March 4, 1951, died November 9, 2023, below the dates, in smaller letters, Korea. Vietnam, a silver star, 2 purple hearts. The flag beside the stone was not just faded, it was disintegrating. The fabric had gone thin at the folds, one corner already separating. It had been there through at least 1 full summer and 1 winter already. No one had replaced it. No one, by the evidence of the grave. No flowers, no personal items, no weathered cards or photographs tucked against the stone the way families sometimes left them, had been here at all. Jackson stood in the November cold and looked at the stone and felt something he didn't immediately have a name for. It was not grief exactly. It was the specific moral discomfort of a person who has encountered something that should not be as it is, and understands that he is now, by the simple fact of being here, responsible for the knowing. Ranger did not move from the grave. He sat with his shoulder against the stone, not alert, not scanning, still, in the particular way he was still when he had decided something. Jackson took a photograph of the headstone with his phone. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with it. He would understand later. The woman at the County Veterans Affairs Office was named Ruth Paisley, and she had worked that office for 22 years, with the efficiency and patience of someone who had long ago accepted that the work was never finished and had decided to do it anyway. She was in her mid-60s, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who listen professionally and have learned that the most important thing a person in her position can do is be fully present when someone comes through the door. Jackson laid his phone on her desk with the photograph showing. She looked at it for a moment and something changed in her face. "Dale Merritt," she said. "You know him." "Knew of him," she said. "He died last November. His wife passed in 2019. No children." She took her glasses off. "We sent the family notification to a nephew, Richard Merritt, out of Lexington. He never responded to the burial arrangements, so the county handled the interment." She paused. We sent a second notice about the grave maintenance program. Standard letter. Lets the family know they can register for the flag replacement service. She was quiet for a moment. He didn't respond to that either. Jackson looked at the photograph on his phone. How long has the flag been like that? Ruth Paisley looked at him steadily. Since we placed it, she said. At the burial. Richard Merritt was 38 years old and worked in commercial real estate development in Lexington. He had attended the University of Kentucky on a golf scholarship and had graduated into a market that rewarded the combination of his presentation, his network, and his complete comfort with the mechanics of pressure. His LinkedIn profile listed 17 closed transactions in the past 3 years, 2 of them in excess of $10 million. His Facebook profile, which was public, and which Jackson looked at from his truck in the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs office, showed a man who went to Kentucky basketball games and drove a German-made sedan, and had recently completed a charity golf tournament in which, according to his own caption, he had shot a .74 and raised $3,000 for a children's hospital. It did not show any evidence that he had a great-uncle buried in Harlan County. It did not show any evidence that he was aware a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts existed in his family. Jackson called the number Ruth Paisley had on file. It went to voicemail after 3 rings. The outgoing message was professional and unhurried. Jackson did not leave a message. He drove home with Ranger in the passenger seat and thought about what he knew and what he didn't. What he knew. Dale Merritt had served in 2 wars. He had been wounded twice and decorated for valor above and beyond the standard. He had died at 72, outlived his wife, and been buried by the county because his family had not responded. His grave had been sitting with a disintegrating flag for a year in a cemetery that otherwise showed every sign of being cared for, which meant the disintegrating flag was not the cemetery's failure. It was the family's. What he didn't know yet was whether Richard Merritt's silence was ignorance or indifference. The answer to that question would determine what came next. He found out 4 days later. He had made contact with Dale Merritt's former unit through the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, a process that took 2 phone calls and produced, on the 3rd day, a callback from a veteran named Leonard Coates in Bristol, Virginia, who had served with Dale Merritt in Vietnam and who, when Jackson explained what he'd found at the cemetery, went quiet for a long moment before saying that Dale Merritt had carried a wounded man out of a fire base under fire for 200 meters with a bullet in his own thigh and had refused medical evacuation until every man in his squad was accounted for, and that there were 6 men still alive today who were alive because of what Dale Merritt had done that day. And that he, Leonard Coates, would very much like to know where the grave was. Jackson also found, through the Harlan County Courthouse property records, that Dale Merritt had owned a 12-acre parcel of land outside Evarts that had been deeded to Richard Merritt through the estate, processed without contest, valued at approximately $340,000 based on the timber rights alone. The estate transfer had been finalized 9 months ago. Richard Merritt had inherited the land. He had not attended the burial. He had not replaced the flag. Jackson called him again. This time, Richard answered. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Jackson did not raise his voice. He stated who he was, Gunnery Sergeant Jackson Hayes, USMC, retired, 4 deployments, 20 years of service, and he stated what he had found, and he stated what he had learned from Leonard Coates in Bristol, and he stated, with complete calm, that he had also spoken with a reporter at the Lexington Herald-Leader who covered Veterans Affairs and who had expressed significant interest in the story of a decorated 2-war Marine buried with a disintegrating flag while his heir collected timber rights from the inherited estate. Richard Merritt said that he'd been meaning to get down there. Jackson let the silence hold for a moment. "I'm not asking you to mean to," Jackson said. "I'm asking you to come." There was a pause. "I don't really know anything about him," Richard said. His voice had shifted. The professional fluency had gone out of it. What was underneath it was younger and less certain. "We weren't close. I barely met him." "I know," Jackson said. "That's why I'm calling. So you can." Ranger had been lying flat across the doorway of Jackson's kitchen during the call. At the words "I'm calling," the dog raised his head and looked at Jackson with the particular attention he gave to moments that required it. Richard Merritt arrived in Harlan County on a Thursday morning 11 days later. He drove the German-made sedan. He was well-dressed in the way people are well-dressed when they aren't sure what the occasion calls for, but are trying to show respect through presentation. He was, in person, younger seeming than his photographs. Not a bad man, Jackson thought, watching him get out of the car at the cemetery gate. A man who had not been asked to look at this before. A man who was looking at it now. Ranger walked to Richard before Jackson said anything. He walked to him the way he walked to people who were carrying something they didn't know how to put down, directly, without ceremony, and sat at his feet. Richard looked down at the dog for a moment. Then he looked up at Jackson. "This is Dale's grave?" he said, when they reached it. "Yes." Richard stood looking at the stone. His hands were at his sides. He read the name. He read the dates. He read the silver star and the purple hearts. He was quiet for a long time, and the quality of his quiet was different from the quiet he'd come with. Less defended, more open. The quiet of someone receiving something. Leonard Coates was standing 20 feet away, beside the grave of a man from his own unit, and he walked over when Richard turned from the stone. He was 71 years old, a big man gone thin in the way of age, with a Vietnam veteran's cap and a particular stillness that matched the stillness of the place. He put out his hand. "Dale Merritt saved my life," Leonard said. "And 5 others. In 1968, I thought you should know that from someone who was there." Nobody spoke for a while after that. A woman from the local VFW post named Carol Hensley had come with a new flag, properly folded in its triangle, and she presented it to Richard with the formal care of someone who understood that the ceremony mattered even when the family hadn't known to ask for it. Richard held it with both hands, the way people hold things they've been given that they're not sure they've earned. 3 weeks later, a stone mason from Harlan completed a cleaning and resealing of Dale Merritt's headstone, paid for by Richard Merritt. The disintegrating flag was replaced with a new one, registered in the county maintenance program under Richard's name and address. Jackson drove past the grave on a Tuesday morning and saw it from the path, the stone clean and bright in the winter light, the flag crisp and new in the wind off the ridge. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. By the following March, Richard Merritt had made 3 trips to Harlan County. On the second trip, he had brought his mother, Dale's niece by marriage, who had photographs of Dale from the 1960s that she hadn't looked at in years and that she spread out on the table at the Evarts Diner for Jackson and Leonard Coates and Carol Hensley. On the third trip, he brought his teenage son, who was 16, and who listened to Leonard Coates tell the story of the firebase in 1968 with the unguarded attention that belongs to young people when they first understand that their family's history contains things they were never told. Jackson sat on the steps of his grandmother's house on a clear March evening with Ranger lying across his feet and thought about what the dog had done, not what Jackson had done, but what Ranger had done, which was to stop at a grave that needed stopping at, in a cemetery where all the other graves had been walked past for months, and to stay there until the stopping meant something. He didn't have a complete theory for how the dog had known. He had stopped needing complete theories. Ranger's tail moved slowly in the evening air, the way it moved when the day had gone the way a day was supposed to go. Richard Merritt faced no legal consequences because he had broken no law. He faced something he had not anticipated, which was the knowledge of what he had inherited beyond the timber rights, a story that his family had been carrying without him, and that he was now part of whether he had known it or not. He told Jackson on the last trip that he had started researching Dale's service record, that he was applying to have Dale's Silver Star documented in the County Historical Archive, that his son had asked to visit the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. None of that was law. All of it was restitution. Jackson's TB had not improved. The words still left him sometimes, mid-sentence, like a door closing in a hallway he thought he knew. The 0430 mornings were still 0430 mornings. But there was, in the life he was building in Harlan County, in the work he had begun doing with the County Veterans Affairs Office, in the mornings at the cemetery, in the particular reliability of Ranger's company, a kind of shape that had not been there before. Not peace exactly, the kind of structure that makes peace possible. He would take that. Sometimes miracles don't carry the names we expect. Sometimes a miracle is a dog stopping in a cemetery on a November morning beside a stone that no one has visited in a year, and a man looking down at the name and understanding that he now knows something he can't unknow. God does not always send justice through courts and sentences. Sometimes he sends it through the particular conscience of a person who cannot walk past what is wrong without doing something about it, and through a dog who already knew which grave needed standing at. Dale Merritt served in 2 wars and was wounded twice and decorated for valor and lay in the ground of his county with a disintegrating flag for a year. He deserved better. Because one man stopped and one dog sat down and refused to move, he got it. That is how the world is repaired, not all at once, but one grave, one name, one act of attention at a time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes the past deserves to be honored. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have a veteran in your family whose story you've never fully heard, maybe today is the day you ask. That story matters. Don't let it go unasked. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people doing what's right, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep you watchful for the names that need to be remembered.